And a family is pleading for help, finding a woman who disappeared after she took a cross-country trip with her boyfriend.
2 people went on a trip, 1 person returned.
Still no sign of Gabby Petito, the 22-year-old woman from Long Island.
When his mother didn't text me back the day I was trying to report her missing, I knew that something was wrong.
Now police have named him a person
September
of interest.
19, 2021. The Wyoming wilderness is quiet, too quiet. Search teams move through the thick brush of the Bridger-Teton National Forest, scanning every inch of land that might hide an answer. Hours pass, and then, a voice cuts through the silence. We found something. Not far from a campsite, investigators stop dead in their tracks. The body of a young woman lies in the dirt. The air grows heavier, because even before the confirmation, many already know who this is. It's 22-year-old Gabrielle "Gabby" Petito. The bright-eyed traveler who just weeks earlier was laughing, smiling, and kissing her fiancé on YouTube, sharing a picture-perfect road trip across America. But now, she's gone. Her death is brutal, the scene disturbing. And the one question everyone asks hangs in the air like smoke: what happened inside that van? Because just as quickly as Gabby is found, the man who was last seen with her, Brian Laundrie, vanishes into the swamps of Florida, leaving behind only silence, suspicion, and a nation desperate for answers. Gabby Petito was not just another name in a news story. She was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's best friend. Born in Blue Point, New York, in 1999, she grew up on Long Island surrounded by family who described her as adventurous, full of energy, and never afraid to chase big dreams. She was artistic, drawn to creating things that carried her personality, whether it was a handmade sketch, a quick doodle in her notebook, or a photo carefully framed for Instagram. She wasn't chasing fame. She was chasing connection, sharing small pieces of her joy with anyone who cared to look. Her friends say Gabby was the kind of person who went out of her way to keep others comfortable. She'd be the one to crack a joke if someone felt awkward, or lend an ear when they didn't want to be alone. It was part of her charm, but also, perhaps, her weakness. She was a peacekeeper. She didn't like conflict, and sometimes that meant ignoring her own feelings just to make others happy. And like so many young adults, Gabby was still figuring out who she was. She loved travel, wide open spaces, and the idea of living outside the box. Van life wasn't just a trend to her, it was freedom. A chance to explore America's landscapes and document every sunrise, every mountain, every quiet night under the stars. That was the Gabby her family knew, a dreamer, a doer, someone always chasing the next horizon. Which makes what happened to her not just tragic, but haunting. Because no one close to her could have imagined how quickly that dream would collapse into a nightmare. August 12, 2021. Moab, Utah. A 911 call comes into dispatch. A man reports seeing Brian Laundrie strike Gabby Petito in the street. Minutes later, police pull over their white van. Bodycam footage captures a scene that feels off from the start. Gabby is crying, visibly shaken, fumbling through her words. Brian stands calmly outside, speaking smoothly with officers, almost detached. The police report would later describe her as the aggressor, claiming she struck Brian. But in the video, it's Gabby who appears terrified, apologizing, minimizing, saying it was just stress. No arrests are made. Instead, they separate for the night. Brian checks into a hotel, Gabby is left with the van. It seems like a temporary fix. But in hindsight, this moment feels like a fork in the road, one where intervention could have changed everything. Days later, Gabby's voice goes silent. Her last known contact comes around August 27th. By September, her van reappears, but only Brian is inside. He drives it more than 2,000 miles back to Florida, refusing to answer questions about where Gabby is. And then, on September 19th, the search in Wyoming ends. Near a quiet, wooded campsite at Spread Creek, investigators find Gabby's body. The autopsy is chilling: blunt force trauma to the head and neck, and manual strangulation. The scene doesn't just tell a story of violence, it tells a story of silence. A young woman left in the wilderness, and a fiancé who chose to vanish rather than explain. And with every detail, one question keeps growing louder. Was this an impulsive act of rage, or something Brian had already decided long before that trip ever began? Brian Christopher Laundrie. On the surface, he seemed like the quiet, outdoorsy counterpart to Gabby's bubbly energy. He loved sketching, reading about survivalism, disappearing into the woods for days. But beneath that calm exterior, cracks were showing. Friends who spent time around the couple noticed the imbalance. Gabby often looked like she was trying to manage his moods, apologizing quickly, smoothing over tension before it escalated. She was the peacekeeper. He was the storm brewing beneath the silence. After Gabby's disappearance, Brian's behavior became a case study in guilt. He drove her van home to Florida, alone. He used her debit card between August 30th and September 1st, pulling money as though nothing had happened. He even sent text messages from Gabby's phone, carefully staged to trick her family into thinking she was still alive. The psychology is chilling. He wasn't just running, he was managing a narrative. Trying to control how the world saw the final days of their trip. To a forensic eye, that need for control isn't new. It's the shadow of deeper issues, insecurity, rage, and fear of abandonment. As for motive, it wasn't robbery. It wasn't random. It was personal. Experts would later describe their relationship as toxic, built on dependency and imbalance. For Brian, Gabby wasn't just a partner, she was an anchor he couldn't live without, and yet, couldn't tolerate when conflict rose. In that wilderness, in that van, with no one else around, violence became inevitable. And while the world didn't yet know it, the moment Gabby was found, Brian had already set his own endgame into motion. As Gabby's story gripped the nation, a new twist unraveled. The man everyone wanted answers from, Brian Laundrie, was suddenly gone. On September 13th, just days after Gabby was reported missing, Brian told his parents he was going hiking in the nearby Carlton Reserve in Florida. He never came back. His parents waited 4 days before reporting him missing. That gap fueled suspicion. Were they protecting him, or just as in the dark as everyone else? The FBI issued a federal arrest warrant, not for murder, but for fraud, tied to the use of Gabby's debit card. Still, the search for Brian became a spectacle. Helicopters circled the swamps, divers combed murky waters, reporters camped outside his parents' home. Every sighting became breaking news, but Brian remained a ghost. And then, a month later, another discovery. In October 2021, searchers found his skeletal remains in Myakkahatchee Creek Park, alongside a backpack, a revolver, and a notebook. Inside that notebook, Brian's final words. A handwritten confession, claiming responsibility for Gabby's death. He tried to frame it as a mercy killing, saying she was suffering. But investigators never found evidence to support that claim. To them, it looked less like mercy, and more like manipulation, even in death. The revelation changed everything. Gabby's killer wasn't a stranger, wasn't a drifter on the road. It was the man she trusted most. The love story that looked so perfect on YouTube had ended in betrayal, violence, and silence. By January 2022, the FBI officially closed its investigation. The conclusion was clear: Brian Laundrie acted alone in Gabby's death. No one else would face charges. But closure doesn't mean peace. For Gabby's family, questions still echo. Why did the Moab police ignore the 911 caller who said Brian struck her? Why did the report paint her as the aggressor when the footage showed the opposite? Could she have been saved if someone had acted differently that night in Utah? And then there's Brian's parents. Their delay in reporting him missing, their silence in the early days, were they following legal advice, or protecting their son? The truth may never be fully known. From a forensic perspective, Brian's psyche reads like a case study in control and collapse. He showed patterns of possessiveness, emotional volatility, and deception. His so-called confession wasn't remorse, it was another attempt to shape the story, to keep control even in his final moments. Trauma, obsession, fear of abandonment, these were the threads woven into Brian Laundrie's psychology. They built a picture of a young man spiraling long before the trip ever began. And while his death closed the file, it left behind an unsettling reality. The warning signs were always there. They were ignored, minimized, or explained away until it was too late. And so the haunting question remains, how many more lives are lost because the cracks in a perfect picture are dismissed, until the picture shatters completely?